Welcome to Wallace and Wire. Today we're talking about Ong Kian Ming's critical assessment of the relationship between DAP and the Chinese electorate. And it's a pretty stark picture. We're looking at what some are calling a political earthquake, especially after the 17th Sabah state election. The numbers are just shocking.
They really are.
I mean, think about it. DAP's support among Chinese voters just plummeted. It went from a high of, what, 78%?
78%, yes. All the way down to a mere 27%. That isn't just a loss of support. It's a profound collapse of trust.
A collapse. That's a strong word.
It is. And, Ong Kian Ming's diagnosis really gets to the heart of it. The widespread fear is that DAP, now that it's part of the federal government, has lost its way.
They're becoming
Malaysian Chinese Association 2.0. That's the label being thrown around. The perception is they're failing to speak out on these huge issues of governance and fairness.
Wow. And that is a very heavy label considering DAP's entire history.
It's the ultimate political insult in this context. There's this analogy being used that the relationship is like an estranged couple right now.
An estranged couple?
Yeah. Furious with each other, the voters feel betrayed, but they're not quite ready for a divorce just yet. The whole thing is just incredibly brittle.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What's the core grievance here? I mean, voters get it, right? DAP can't just act like an opposition party anymore.
Of course, they understand that. The problem isn't compromise itself, it's the strategic silence.
Strategic silence.
DAP leaders are in a tough spot. They speak out too much. They could destabilize the government. Nobody wants another Sheraton move from 2020.
So they're using stability as a justification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the voters see that as a muzzle. They can understand the need for stability, but they're drawing a line between stability and, well, impunity.
Right.
This perceived silence, this soft peddling on issues of corruption and poor governance, that's what's becoming fatal for them. People expected them to use their power to drive change.
But instead, the perception is that they're just tolerating it.
They're tolerating it. Both DAP and Parti Keadilan Rakyat are seen as repeatedly looking the other way on clear abuses of power.
And all while enjoying the perks of being in government, the ministerial positions, the authority. That must be what really grates on people.
It is. It's the hypocrisy of it in their eyes. They're enjoying the power but are silent on the very things they used to fight for. It's exactly the same frustration voters had with Malaysian Chinese Association for decades.
So that Malaysian Chinese Association 2.0 label really does hit home. Now, this wasn't just a general feeling. There was one specific incident that acted as the final straw in Sabah.
Yes, the timing was just devastating. A few days before the election, a businessman came forward with some very serious allegations.
He accused Dato Seri Shamsul Iskandar, right, the Prime Minister's senior political secretary at the time.
That's right, allegations of soliciting bribes for a mining contract in Sabah.
And these kinds of allegations, unfortunately, aren't new. But it was the reaction from the authorities that lit the fuse.
That's the critical part. The Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission tried to arrest Ching, the accuser, right before the vote.
They arrested the whistleblower?
Well, they tried to. He was released later, but the damage was done. For many urban Chinese voters, this looked like a clear case of the system protecting its own, silencing a critic at a crucial moment.
And these are the very voters flying back home to places like Kota Kinabalu and Sandakan to cast their ballots.
Precisely. They saw this and thought, here we go again. They decided right then and there to teach DAP a lesson.
Just like they did with Malaysian Chinese Association back in 2008.
It's the same playbook. The message is simple. We are tired of our values on clean governance being sacrificed just so you can hold on to power. That was the moment it all crystallized.
Okay, so the mirror is broken. How can it be mended? Ong Kian Ming's advice seems to be that they have to walk a very fine line.
They do. And time is really running out. The first piece of advice is immediate and essential. DAP has to establish clear, non-negotiable red lines.
Red lines on what specifically?
On governance, on corruption. And these can't just be vague principles. They have to communicate them directly to Prime Minister Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim and make it clear what action they will take if those lines are crossed.
Even if it risks the government's stability?
Even then, there have to be consequences. It's about restoring that perception of having a backbone.
But that's a defensive move. What about going on the offensive? What about actual systemic reform.
This is the other crucial part. The government has to pursue what Ong Kian Ming calls major reform agendas, things that are big enough to capture the public's imagination.
Not just small reforms.
Exactly. They need to avoid these small technical reforms that the public barely understands or cares about.
Can you give me an example of the difference? What's a small versus a major reform?
Okay, a small reform might be a new procurement act. It's important for governance, yes, but it doesn't resonate with the average person. A major reform, on the other hand, changes the whole game.
Like the anti-hopping law.
The anti-hopping law is the perfect example. It was a huge, visible victory. It fixed a problem that everyone was sick of. DAP needs more wins like that. They need to show they're still fighting the big fights.
So if Sabah was the first major alarm, where is this wave of dissatisfaction heading next?
The prediction is that the next big test will be the Sarawak state election, probably in the next year or two.
And after that?
After that, look to the urban centers in Malacca and Johor. Those are the next battlegrounds.
But Sarawak is interesting. DAP is in the opposition there. How does unhappiness with the federal government hurt them in a state election where they don't even hold power?
It's about perception. If Sarawak DAP is seen as ineffective or, worse, compromised because of their federal alliance, they lose their entire reason for being.
And if the ruling Sarawak alliance is delivering on local issues?
Then voters might just decide there's no point in a weak opposition. They could shave DAP bald, as the saying goes.
Meaning they could lose every single seat they hold.
A total wipeout. Just like what nearly happened in Sabah, it becomes a protest vote against federal weakness, played out at the local level.
And in Malacca and Johor, surely voters wouldn't go back to the Malaysian-Chinese Association.
That's the fear. And it's a very real possibility, not because they suddenly love Malaysian-Chinese Association, but purely to teach DAP a lesson.
A protest vote.
A strategic protest vote. And it becomes even more dangerous if Malaysian-Chinese Association candidates run smart campaigns, playing the sympathetic underdog, reminding voters that DAP is now the one in power.
On top of all this, there's another threat looming, isn't there? The rise of Parti Warisan in peninsular Malaysia.
Absolutely. Ong Kian Ming is convinced that Parti Warisan, fresh off their win in Sabah, will expand their operations to the peninsula, the westward expansion.
And a new third force. Where do you think they'll do the most damage?
They're expected to chip away at votes from both DAP and Parti Keadilan Rakyat, especially in those really tight, mixed parliamentary seats.
The marginals.
The marginals, seats won by just a few hundred votes. If a Warisan candidate can pull away just a small percentage of disillusioned voters, that's enough to flip the seat. It makes the next election a much more complicated, multi-cornered fight.
Okay, let's go back to Sabah for a moment. There were other internal failings mentioned beyond the big picture stuff.
Yes, there were. The first one was just poor candidate selection, putting up young, relatively inexperienced candidates in key seats like Lu Yang and Tanjung Papat.
It signaled complacency?
Exactly. It told voters that DAP was taking their support for granted, that they thought they could field anyone and still win.
And the second factor, this one's an old story in politics.
Arrogance. The perception that some DAP leaders, once they became ministers or deputy ministers, just became disconnected. They stopped being visible.
There was one exception mentioned, though.
Yes, Deputy Minister Datuk Chan Fong Hin, he's still seen as approachable, still on the ground. Which, just proves the point. It shows what's missing from the others.
And the third factor was the economy. The cost of living, the sales and service tax.
General economic pain. When times are tough and the ringgit doesn't go as far, voters get angry at the government, all of them. And DAP is now part of that government, so they share the blame.
There was one final, very specific Sabah issue as well, the 40% net tax revenue return.
Right. This is a huge emotional issue for Sabahans. It's their constitutional right.
And the federal government's messaging on it was weak?
Very weak. DAP was expected to be a strong champion for this, but they didn't have a compelling narrative or a clear plan. That created a vacuum, and Parti Warisan stepped right in and owned the issue, positioning themselves as the true defenders of Sabah's rights. At the end of the day, the relationship between DAP and its core voters is at a critical juncture. This can't be fixed with a few small policies or, some nice statements. They have to act decisively, define those red lines, and push for major reforms, or they risk a massive backlash that will spread across the entire country.
It really puts them in an impossible position. How do you balance the need for stability with the need for principle without completely losing who you are? So what stands out to you in all this? Do you think that comparison to Malaysian Chinese Association 2.0 is actually fair? Remember to like and subscribe for more videos like this.